So here we are, start of the next day. As you can see, it's dried interestingly. It's a bit pale in areas. I think that's probably because I watered down the paint a little too much. But I'm going to go back over it and see what I can do to improve that. I think I'm going to take a dark colour and start going over some of the areas that could do with darkening really, and then take it from there. So I've started to do this. One hint I think you can probably use quite well, just for the sake of stylisation. If you put a lamp over the top, oops, then you can naturally see where you're going to get shadows, and you can paint in those gaps where it's got, see, you've got the shadow there. I've already done that little bit there, but yeah, there's some around here and stuff like that. So if you paint in those gaps, and then you turn it again, then it doesn't matter what angle you're looking at, you're always going to look at it as if you're in the right angle to have the shadow coming down from the top. And in fact, you can use that technique for painting armour and stuff like that. If you want to paint metallic armour without actually using metallic paints, then you can use that technique to draw in light striations and the shading in the correct places. Some pretty cool techniques. So yeah, I mean, if you're taking it to extremes, you can always chuck it into a photo, take some photos and then chuck them into a photo to play around with the contrast until you can literally only see the raised edges, and use that as a reference for shading your models. Okay, so here we go. For my next bit, I've actually got a tripod, so hopefully it's a bit more stable than last time. You can see quite nicely where it's dried, a bit darker. It's nice because it's flowing into the holes, all the paint I was putting on earlier. Still wet. I've got this nice little fan you can probably hear whirring away, that is really useful for just speeding up the drying. Obviously turn it off when you're painting because you don't want your paints drying out too quickly. Clean up the palette in between. It's a really good hint. Work tidy. All the usual sort of things. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and dry brush. I'm not sure exactly what colours, but maybe some more darker colour here actually, because it's going to be well worn. So we'll do a little bit of that. Now I'm going to just use some plain old acrylic paint, and I'm going to water it down slightly. And I'm going to start dabbing it into these areas here. That's probably a bit heavy, so I'm just going to water it down some more. There you go. Keep to the model's boundaries as much as you can, just to keep it all together. There's a little bit there I want to get. And there's some bits in here. So this shade's going to go down, go quite a bit lighter just because it's watered down, and that's an effect that I want, because I don't want it to be black on here. I just want it to be sort of grey. Fill in some of these darker areas here. And ultimately, if you make any mistakes, you think it's a bit dark or whatever, you can always lighten it up afterwards with a bit of paint. Just don't do too many layers and keep it thin so that it doesn't blob on top and doesn't look awful, basically. You don't lose too much detail. Just more shadow. Don't overdo it. I'm probably overdoing it a little now, but I'm going to be doing some dry brushing over top of this, so it's going to disappear a lot anyway. For the sake of consistency, we're going to put that in black as well, that little bit of walkway, little cut out into the cliff. Feel like a bit like Bob Ross, Happy Little Cliff. Lovely stuff. Excellent, right, so that's looking quite good. So on this side, this is quite awkward because it's dried quite light. So I think what I might do is just try and get a really, really watery wash and just try and darken it, but not too much. So it retains some of that nice natural white that's on it. I mean, that's just literally where I've had my paint's too thin when I was going over top of it. So you could argue that maybe I'm being a bit too precious about it, but I like it. There's a gap there. Fill that in. Gap there. And the more detail you put in, the better, I guess. It's just quite a lot of effort to go over this many times. And nice. Okay, not sure why my video stopped recording. So, hopefully it's not going to stop recording now, but yeah. So, if it didn't actually record properly, it's going to be a bit of a pain. But essentially, just in case I'm reiterating myself, all I've done is I've taken the grey paint, same shade as all of this. And actually I've run out. And so I take some white paint, which is actually not terribly good nick, but so just give it a mix and just add a tiny bit to just raise the shade. That might be a little bit too much, but I've done it now. And then so it's lighten the tint slightly, so it's above that grey. And then I'm going to load the brush, but dry it off this kitchen towel slightly. So, and then as I was explaining before, I hope I haven't lost that video, but I might have done. Get 3 brushes on there just to make sure. And you want to just gently start off going over the raised bits, trying to find the bits that you want. Again, as I said before, this is stylized, so it's not meant to be terribly realistic, but as long as it looks good, that's the main thing. It's going to sit on your battlefield after all. And I'll go around the entire model doing this bit by bit until I'm happy with the way it looks. I'm avoiding these stairs because that's still slightly wet. As I said before, I'm running out of time to get this done for Wednesday. So right. So the idea in general is I'm going to do this several times with slightly varying shades of highlighting, so it looks a bit more highlighted each time, basically. I'll probably do less on each stroke, so I've been quite liberal about what I'm covering, whereas in fact later on I'll only want to do the tips and things like that at the very highest level of detail. I hope you can sort of see what's going on. I'm still learning about this whole YouTube stuff, making videos. Happy to answer questions if for whatever reason you do happen to look at this channel. Don't be tempted to skip any of this. Keep building up with the paint on the brush, because you'll put too much on, then you'll regret it and it will look rubbish. in your mind anyway, even if it doesn't actually. I mean, this is actually one of the easiest techniques in the world to do, as long as you just take it slowly. So I think I've showed more or less what I want to do. So I'm probably going to do the rest off camera until the next layer, where I just increase the colour tint or whatever. Or until I decide to do these stairs as well. They could be interesting, because I might do them a different shade just to add to the interest of the model. Again, don't worry if you make mistakes or anything like that. It's not like you can't just paint over it again. And doing this dry brushing technique actually hides up a lot of mistakes. So it's not a new technique. There's numerous tutorials out there on the internet, so don't feel you shouldn't just go and have a look at some of those as well. Okay, I'll come back when this is done a bit more. Right, so I don't know if you can see that now. So I've completely dry brushed all but this section, where I've just dry brushed around the edges a little and a little on the steps, but I'm not going to do too much in that. I've just now mixed in a bit of an actual Games Workshop paint and watchable bone into my mix of paint, and I'm going to just start highlighting some of the bits that I want to stand out a little more, which is mostly going to be the sharp edges. You can see that. I'm not going to do this everywhere, just places that I want the model to stand out a little and sharpen up the edges a little, maybe. So certainly on this end of the model, where I purposely kept it quite light, just adds a bit more character if it's not monotone. Now this particular end is going to take me building up lots of layers of paint of all very subtly differing tones. You think about how quartz is in rock though, it's not unusual to have different types of rock in the same basic mounds. Obviously ore sits in rock, things like gold obviously. I've got this a very dry mix. I'm probably going to have to reload my brush and actually pour some more paint, but there's nothing too subtle about this, I'm afraid. Okay. Right, I'm just going to carry on doing that, and then I'll show you what it looks like now. So just very subtly highlighted at the moment, so we'll see what it looks like afterwards. So I've gone ahead and I've finished the dry brushing. I've then gone over it again with a slightly lighter shade. Now I can see all the errors from this angle, so I'll have to go and do some more stuff about that. And then on top of that, keep increasing the shade. So I've gone a slightly browny colour. Actually, I've gone a tabby brown, and then one of the really old bleached bone. Just raise it again. I'm just going over this very, very gently. So I want this to be slightly more earthen, as if people have walked on it. Still not emptying the bristles properly. Okay, just highlight where people have walked. Still not quite sure exactly how I'm going to finish that, but it's just a slightly more creamy colour, so it's in contrast to the very much pale outer hardened rock. So it's almost like where it's been cut in, it's a different inside. I'll probably try and, I don't know whether to make it lighter at the edges. I just don't want it a monotone stairs. Make these decisions up on the fly. And I also want to put some different shades in there of, so we'll see. It's just a case of going over it until you're happy. As long as you don't overdo it. But even if you do, it doesn't really matter that much. Maybe I'll use some Screaming Skull. I mean, you could go down a different route and go the blue route, because the rock, you know, they can look slightly blocky. There's slightly bluey. There's nothing wrong with that, and you could go down this the Space Horse palette. So, for example, you could start off with blue with the Fang. I think you probably want to spray that. Then you could gradually build up. You've got your Fenrisian grey, and you've got more rust grey. So you could build up layers of that. I think that'll look quite good actually. Might look better than this. It just depends what you fancy on your battlefield. I mean, if you're going to go down the snow route, for example, you could highlight this in snow. You could put more flock on in like the where it's gathered up in the bits, and paint that slightly whiter. Yeah. Right. So I'm going to try and see if I can highlight a little bit around the edges with this Ushtavi bone. The Screaming Skull, sorry. Oh, what was it? I lose track. Yeah, the Screaming Skull. Basically a lighter colour. Now, I've never painted with Vallejo paints, but I'm led to believe that they're actually really good, and just as good, if not better, than Citadel. The only reason I use these is because, frankly, I quite like walking in the shop and buying them, even though they are slightly overpriced. There's always the hobby shops as well, and there's a really good hobby shop in Andover, near where I live. It sells really good stuff. There's one in Salisbury, near where I live. So yeah. Really want to do something with these steps, and I'm still figuring out in my head exactly what I want to do. Do I want to highlight them even more in a lighter colour, or do I want to start putting some kind of shading on, some other completely different colour, maybe some greens or something, some ochres, some yellows maybe. Because it's completely stylised, the oyster? World's your oyster. If I was doing this more realistically, I'd probably be on Google right now, being a bit more careful. I also have quite a limited palette at the moment, so I've got a nice big toolbox, as if you can still hear me, a nice big toolbox full of stuff. But never the ones I actually want. I think everyone's like that. I think we're going to go for some green. Mixing the paint. It's quite old, it's quite separated, so I think I'm going to actually do a complete refresh of all my paints actually, because they're all getting a bit old in the tooth. It's got a mustardy, ochre-y. It's quite thin, just need to load the bristles really well. I don't want this everywhere, I just want it the edges of the steps really. Lichen and stuff's going on, and I'm still trying to tell the story, the narrative. Maybe that nobody ever actually notices this, it's just me who knows, but hey. It's kind of worked, I guess. Very subtle. We need a bit more actual green. Excellent. I'm going with pure instinct here, so you know. Some of these broken bits. Oh, yeah, a bit there. Certainly up right here where it's very worn. The lichens got into it and it's starting to change colour, and maybe in these holes as well, just on the edges. Lovely, I like that. You can have a bit of green coming out of these. It's very subtle, very subtle. Start putting some up in these crevices here. So I want to put this in first because don't want very much of it showing, and I intend to go over this again with dry brush of some kind. But it's important to have it there as the contrast. Okay, bit in there. Okay, excellent. What I was doing there was just literally scraping off any excess that I'd put that I didn't really want on there. So I've just carried on, just put some green in around the place. I've come back over with a slightly lighter oak, screaming skull colour. I've put in a few dabs of a slightly different grey in some of these gaps, just very subtle differences, just to add a bit more depth. I've gone over this a bit more with a bit more ochre, a bit more of an ochre chalky colour to just blend in that green. And now it kind of looks about right. I dare say I could be a bit more bold with some of these choices, but I think for argument's sake I'm going to leave it quite plain. So I think really the only real thing that needs to be done to continue this is the base itself. Now I'm not quite sure what I want to do with it. Do I want to go black and shade that up, or do I want to do something a bit more subtle than that? I mean, ultimately the real star of the show is the rock itself, so black would be quite a good choice, and then just dry brush it up to a similar sort of grey, which seems a bit weird considering it's already that kind of grey now. Maybe I'll do it brown actually, or a dirt colour anyway. Yeah, so hopefully when you see this next it will be more or less finished. So I decided to go with the brown idea. I figure it will fit in quite nicely with some of my other scenery that's already got brown bases. So it's just now a case of going around, being as neat as possible, but if you do get it wrong, remember you can just paint over it. Just don't do it too often. Yeah, and just carrying on like this. I think after it's done it will look quite effective. I'll do some dry brushing around with the flock that I've already got on the base. This is another layer to help seal that in. And it may require another coat because of the streaks. It's quite when using brushes you're going to get streaks, especially when it's a big brush like this. But honestly, I'd rather do a couple of coats with a big brush than do it all over with small paint. And you could argue I could be a bit neater, but that is true, I could be. But I don't have all the time in the world. I mean, the reality is, what would you rather be doing? Well, I mean, personally, I prefer making scenery, but I was thinking most people want to get their armies finished and actually help them playing. But actually, this is a lot of fun itself, making scenery. So bear in mind that this is essentially my first attempt at doing this. So you know, I'm pretty pleased with it, given that it could have gone a lot worse. Now, for this sort of thing, I wouldn't bother using, you know, your Citadel paints. I would buy some cheaper brand to do the base coats. The pigment is not as good, sure, but you're going to be building up on top of it with other paints, and that's when in the detail is where you probably want to put your expensive paints in, more expensive. But yeah, you don't have to use Games Workshop paints. There's plenty of others out there like Vallejo, Model Painter. I mean, I'm using completely off brand. I suspect these are really low pigment, but it doesn't really matter. I may well be using the wrong terminology as well. I'm not an expert, and I never pretend to be. I'm just trying to show you what I do. So this is obviously going to be one of my next videos. Not the next video. I think I'm going to carry on with doing my scenery inspired by Mars. Right, so there's my base coat. Just got to let that dry now, and then probably I can almost guarantee that I need another coat on there. So here we go. I did indeed do some more very minor highlighting along here, but nothing considerable. I think you can see the greens better from this angle to show you. So it's a bit different colour around here compared to here for the walkway. The shade's all really nice. See the green just in the crevices there, and maybe spreading a little, but covered over a bit of grey to hide all of the just too much excess. Hides the excess. Goes along nicely. Again, you're probably going to get green in rocks growing, whatever the green is. See the shade in the crevice? It's going up slightly greyer and up to a highlight up here. And that end rock, so you can get a better lighting angle here. Again, you can just see the different colours of the grey there, so that's quite nice. Back around to this side. Yeah, so the actual rock's looking pretty good. I left the base quite minimalistic. I painted over all of that. I didn't bother flocking the entire base. I've actually just close to the actual rock itself, so that's all the dust and stuff and stones gathering in the wind perhaps and getting caught up in the different bits of the rock formation. Left these little flat stone on there and highlighted it just a tiny bit in lighter colours, just so you can just see it and it stands out a little bit. It's just brown, and then I took the same brown and increased the shade slightly by mixing a little white in, and just dry brushed over it. And then, as I say, I used I think Xandri dust just to put a few very tiny highlights on these tiny rocks, just so they look like rocks. I've just gone around and I've just dry brushed quite carefully, but not that carefully. And actually left the edges slightly darker, which might seem a little strange, but it seems to just bring the whole piece together. Adds this kind of a natural border. So there you go. Again from distance, just like that. Fantastic. Thank you for watching, and if you liked it, please like and subscribe. Thank you very much. Ta-da.